everyone, welcome to English 112. I am the instructor. My name is Lillian Ruiz, and what I wanted to do was to tell you a little bit about our class, review our syllabus and our course outline, and give you a sense of what we will be doing over this semester. So today is mostly just introduction, and then we can begin in earnest next week. And as you know, this is an online class, and we are using the Moodle online platform. And if you were to go onto Moodle, you could see at the top of the Moodle page, I've got several folders there. The first is entitled Syllabus and Other Documents. And within that folder, that's where I've placed our syllabus, our course outline, and where I will be placing any of the documents that I would normally distribute as handouts if we were meeting face-to-face. I've also got a section entitled Due Dates. Now, the due dates are included in our course outline, but I also wanted to separate them off so that you could see them all in one place. And I've got a folder for past class sessions. So what I'm going to be doing is putting the previous week's work in that folder so that you can access it throughout the semester. And basically what you would see as you turn onto our Moodle page is that particular week's worth of work, but you can access the entire semester through past class sessions. You can also see that I've got a discussion forum, and that's where we are going to be trying to duplicate what would occur during class discussion. So what I'm going to be asking you to do is to answer what I call attendance questions at the ending of each of these videos. And then I will be posting these videos, obviously, throughout the course of the semester. And I'm trying to duplicate as much as possible what would occur if we were meeting in a face-to-face class. So if we were meeting in a face-to-face class, we would be meeting on Tuesdays and Thursdays at noon. Therefore, I'm going to be posting a video every Tuesday and Thursday by noon. Actually, I'm going to try to post it before that, but you can count on basically seeing a video every Tuesday and Thursday at noon. And that video would cover the content that I would normally cover in class. And then the class discussion forum would be a place where we could interact with one another as a class, as if we were having a class discussion. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as I review the requirements for the class and the class syllabus. I also have an optional chat, which is just that. It's optional, but if you ever wanted to have a chat with me, we can access it through that portal. Also an optional Zoom, and if you were to go on there, you'll see my Zoom number, though certainly you can contact me and ask me for that as well. And you can also see that our first class is scheduled, and this is week 1 on the 26th, Thursday, though I'm well aware that you might be watching this before Thursday. I wanted to have this video available by the start of the semester, but basically I'm going to be posting videos every Tuesday and Thursday by noon. And what I wanted to do, as I indicated, excuse me, is to review the syllabus, and that is in the syllabus and other documents folder. So this might be a good time for you to access that syllabus. And you can see that on that syllabus, it just has some general contact information. That's how I began it. My name is there, Lillian Ruiz. Most people, call me Lillian. I'm pretty informal, but call me whatever feels comfortable. My phone number is there, so if I'm not in my office, you can leave a voicemail. My email is there. One thing about my email, you'll notice that it's just my surname with no first initial, because I have been at GCC so long that basically I started before the email system was instituted. That would be 1993. And in the early days of the email system, we used just surnames, going to show how little foresight we had that we would obviously need first initials as well, because there would be multiple people with the same surname. So if you ever see an email address with someone's surname and only their surname, obviously they've been there for a while. My office, North 328A, that happens to be in the Inclusion and Diversity Center. And my office hours, which are Monday through Thursday, 12 until 1, or by appointment. So I should be in my office during those times, barring a meeting, let's say, or an emergency. So the textbooks for this class, and again, this is listed on the syllabus, the Bedford Introduction to Literature. Now, I've got the 11th edition, but you can use other editions. The page numbers that I have listed are for the 11th edition, so obviously, if you aren't using the 11th edition, you can not necessarily rely on those page numbers, but you can always go to the index. You will find that many of the works that we will be reading over the course of the semester are works that you can actually find online. And whenever that is the case, I will be providing you with those web links. So basically, we're reading literature this semester. So luckily, thus far, unless something is pulled because of copyright issues, I've been able to find all of the literature that we will be reading this semester, the short stories, the dramas, and the poems. But because of copyright issues, again, I have not been able to find all of the ancillary information in the textbook that talks about what literature is, how to read it, how to write about it, so forth and so on. So in terms of the textbook, you can also find a copy on reserve in the GCC library, if that's of any assistance to you. As you know, textbooks come out fairly frequently with new editions, and this 11th edition left out one of my favorite plays, A Raisin in the Sun, and I think it was worth ordering a separate text so that we could access A Raisin in the Sun. And luckily, A Raisin in the Sun is available in paperback form, so you can find it pretty inexpensively. There also is a copy on reserve. And thus far, I've been able to, as I indicated, find a web link that I'll be sharing with you, unless it's pulled by the time we get to that particular point in the semester. Things are always a little bit sketchy with the web. Something that's up now may not necessarily be up later. And then it's assumed that students will have a good dictionary at the source for reference, and I'm sure that you've got that loaded into your computers, but having access to it and actually using it, those could be two very different things. So the course description, to remind you what you signed up for, that this class builds on the academic writing process and skills introduced in English Composition 1. So there is a prerequisite for this class, what we call English 101 or English Composition 1, Introduction to Composition, to get you ready for this class, Introduction to Literature. So if you feel that you have not satisfied the prerequisites for this particular course, please contact me and we can discuss what options might be best for you. So this class builds and extends on the academic writing process and skills introduced in English Composition 1, and students develop close reading abilities for a variety of literary and sometimes even non-literary texts, and hone critical thinking skills as well as research and documentation skills, using a variety of texts that can include essays, fiction, poetry, drama, among other texts. Writing assignments emphasize the formal, researched, and documented essay, include creative experiments and literary analysis. Course readings include selections from a wide variety of authors and genres and texts that engage students in analysis and research. There are 3 versions of this class with slightly different focus. You are in English 112, which is the Introduction to Literature class. There is also an English 114, which incorporates creative writing, so that you would actually do some of your own writing of short story, dramas, and poems, in addition to reading those works by others. And there's also a 116 class that incorporates a cinema component. So you start to talk about how to analyze cinema from a literary perspective. But this is the English 112, where, as I had indicated previously, we're going to focus on short stories. What is a short story? How do we read it? How do we write about it? How do we interpret it? Dramas. What is a drama? How do we read about it? How do we write about it? How do we interpret it? And then finally, poems. And again, how do we read them? How do we write about them? How do we interpret them? And of course, we can't read all of the short stories or dramas or poems that exist. They're just some representative ones that I thought illustrated some of the elements of literature, which is really what the point of this class is to talk about what literature is. So, learning outcomes. At the ending of this class, you should be able to, 1, develop an appreciation for and understanding of literature. We will spend actually the entire semester trying to figure out what literature is. It sounds like an easy question, but it's really not. 2, to see reading and writing as an ever-evolving process. 3, to use the rules of formal academic writing. But 4, to improve each student's unique sense of voice in his or her writing. You don't want to sound like me or the textbook. You want to sound like yourself. But again, you want to make sure that you're following the formal academic rules of writing. To improve oral and written communication skills, I have that on all of my syllabi, regardless of the course. I also teach personal communication skills classes, public speaking, interpersonal communications. I also teach communications classes, so you might have heard about the horror film class that I teach, because I am a firm believer in that you can analyze media and popular culture from an academic perspective. So if you're looking to pick up a class, you wanted to learn a little bit more about my horror film class, just feel free to ask. But going back to our class, and to effectively utilize word processing, email, search engines, and the internet in the study of literature. So procedures, and as I had indicated, I'm going to try to mimic what would occur if we were meeting in a face-to-face class, which would be on Tuesdays and Thursdays at noon. So you can kind of think about us meeting every Tuesday and Thursday at noon if you so wanted to, because I will be posting a video of myself discussing class material by the time our class would normally meet in person, Tuesday, Thursday, noon. Again, I'll probably post it earlier, but you can expect that by noon on Tuesday and Thursday, it would be uploaded. You have a 48-hour deadline to watch that video for that class and answer its corresponding attendance question. Those are the questions I'm going to have in the class discussion form. There will be questions that don't necessarily have right or wrong answers. I'm just interested in your thinking and your analysis. And if you need an extension, just ask me. 48 hours isn't enough. Your answer on the discussion form is your attendance for that class. So if you want to know how to do well in this class, is to watch all of the videos, because this is where I'm going to be talking about the class content, and to answer all of the discussion form questions, because this is where you will be contributing your participation. And you're not required to respond to your peers' answers on the discussion form. Certainly you can if you wanted to, but I think of it again as a face-to-face class where some people might elect to just quietly listen and others might elect to have a class conversation. And I think both are equally valid, so you get to decide. What you are required to do is to read everybody's responses and my responses to them and you, because I will be responding to all of you. That'll give you an idea. It'll help simulate what we would have actually experienced if we were meeting live and talking with one another. So, any additional interaction you have with your classmates in the discussion forum is participation, similar to participating in a live class. And yes, some students learn best by participating, while others learn best by listening. So you can decide how much or how little to participate. You should, however, read all of the discussion forum responses from your classmates for optimal learning. And then any written assignments that we have, and we'll have journals and papers and a final exam. I'll talk about all of them shortly. I'm asking that you send those to my email, which is Ruiz, R-U-I-Z, at gcc.mass.edu via PDF, because that's how my grading program works best. And then I will evaluate it and then send it back to your email. So course requirements, some pretty general stuff. You want to do all the reading and the writing assignments by the due dates. You want to watch all of the class videos. You want to make sure that you are answering all of the class attendance questions. 2 out-of-class papers will be assigned. One will be approximately midway through the semester, and one will be towards the ending of the semester, which gives us enough time to start talking a little bit about what a class paper would look like in response to literature. And you probably did something comparable in Composition 101, but not necessarily connected to literature. So that's the distinction between the 2 levels of courses. And we will have one towards the ending of the semester. I'll talk about both a little bit more. And again, I'm going to be asking that you submit them and all written assignments via PDF to my email so that I can respond to them and then return them back to you. We will also have periodic journal entries discussing your reactions to the readings. These are informal writing assignments that I call journals that I'll talk about momentarily. And there will also be a final examination. The final exam will be open book, open notes, so you can put together everything that we've done over the course of this semester. It'll be an essay exam, but I'll give you choice within it. So, if you are a returning student to GCC, you probably are familiar with the Institutional Services Disability Statement, but I wanted to read it nonetheless. That Greenfield Community College values inclusion and equal access to its programs and activities. It's committed to fostering an environment of respect and participation. So our goal is to create learning environments that are equitable, inclusive, and welcoming. There are aspects to the instruction or design of this course that result in barriers to your inclusion or your accurate assessment or achievement. Please notify me as soon as possible. And if you're a student with a disability and you need reasonable academic accommodations, please contact the Office of Disability Services. And the contact information is again in the syllabus. So now I'm on the section entitled Response Journal. As you had indicated, or as I had indicated, you will be writing informal responses to some of the readings. So let me read you this blurb about Response Journal that's in our syllabus, and then I will elaborate. Reading and writing is an ongoing process, so the journals are meant as an opportunity to discuss reactions to the readings. So your guidelines will be very informal, since students should use the journals as an opportunity to explore the literature in the way they feel would be most beneficial. That said, I can give you some suggestions in class, and you might want to perhaps expand and develop on an attendance question. But overall, the journal should reflect whatever relevant thoughts, questions, etc. students have about the readings, and we will find out that the questions sometimes are a lot more important than the answers. And it's usually best to record those thoughts immediately after completing the reading assignment, or at least I believe so. Though I've had students who say that they like to record their thoughts as they are reading so they don't forget them. Other students say they like to watch the class videos and to read the class discussion forum responses before they do any writing. That's also fine as well. And journals provide an excellent opportunity to brainstorm and free write paper topics. Now, I'm going to be providing you with paper topics, but you can also create your own paper topic as long as you have it approved by me. So we will talk about papers a little bit more as the semester progresses, but that's something that you can keep in the back of your mind. And that ultimately you might be able to use your journals as a way to try out a sample paper topic. And because journals are informal, I am evaluating them informally. I'm not reading them for grammar or mechanics, just for content. Think of it as a conversation on paper. I'm really interested in your thoughts. And I'm evaluating it rather than on a traditional letter scale, on a checkmark scale, because it is informal. So an excellent would be a plus. A good is a check plus, which is usually where most of the grades fall. A satisfactory is a check. There also is a less than satisfactory, which is a check minus, and an unsatisfactory, which is a minus. And late journals will lower your grade by 1 full grade, and no late journal will be accepted after 1 week has elapsed, unless you've made other arrangements with me beforehand. So do ask for an extension. I will be happy to grant it for you. And journals, again, submitted via PDF to my email, Ruiz, R-U-I-Z, at gcc.mass.edu. So, the journals, I'm thinking approximately a page or so responds to the literature pieces that you select. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when I talk about the actual readings that we will be doing in the next few minutes. Attendance, which again I sort of think of as the class discussion or participation piece. Class activity and discussion is extremely important and cannot be made up, so I think of that as our discussion form. Thus, absences and tardiness will be negatively reflected in your participation grade. And while each case is different, anything more than 2 absences could lower your grade. So basically, you could go through and not respond to 2 of the discussion forum questions, but anything more than that can start to influence your grade. And in fact, excessive non-answers could result in failure. And you don't need to notify me if it turns out that you're going to be absent for that particular discussion question. But if you are going to miss several, then you need to let me know what's going on. Consultations. You can meet with me during office hours or by appointment. And papers. And most of what I put for the papers are about formatting. That papers are due on the days specified. They should be typed and double spaced, have 1-inch borders. The pages should be numbered. There should be a cover page that includes the paper title, your name, course and section number, my name, the due date. I suspect this is something that you've discussed in previous English classes, but we will review it as well. Late papers, just like any other late assignment, will lower your grade by 1 full grade. No late paper will be accepted after 1 week has elapsed unless you've made other arrangements with me. In other words, ask for extensions. Paper assignments will be distributed during the term, but as I indicated, I also encourage you to create your own assignments and have them approved by me. So in terms of that first paper that's going to be due about midway through the semester, you have the option to revise it, that paper number 1. I will review it, this time for grammar and mechanics as well as content, unlike the journals. And this time I will put a letter grade on it and with feedback. And if you're content with your letter grade, you're done. But if you wanted to revise for a higher letter grade, you could. So this is another way that you can positively impact your grade in this class. You'll watch all the videos, answer all the discussion questions, and think about rewriting your first paper if you aren't happy with your grade. And basically, I just ask that you do a revision incorporating my comments. And if you're not sure how to proceed, you can always make an appointment with me and we could develop that further. And that you hand in the original with my comments along with your revision. You get the higher of the 2 grades. And I don't feel like I'm giving you any unfair advantage because the reality is this is how professional writers write. They go through lots of feedback. Now, I indicated there are 2 papers, one midway through the semester, one towards the ending of the semester. Because the second paper is due towards the ending of the semester, there probably won't be time to rewrite it. But since I think of the first paper as a learning opportunity or a learning exercise, that you really wouldn't need to rewrite your second paper because you've already learned with the first paper how to write a paper. That said, there is some room for negotiation. I have had students submit in the second paper early enough so that they could rewrite it, but that would be something that we would need to discuss and come to some agreement with. It's not guaranteed the way it is with the first paper. And you can't revise late papers. Again, another reason for asking for an extension. And the keeping any copy of any of those important assignments, such as a paper, is always a good idea for yourself. And submit it, of course, via PDF to my email for my evaluation. So there's a section there on plagiarism, which I'm going to skip because we can talk about that next class. And a section on grading, and I think that's probably the section you most wanted to know about. These are approximate percentages. That 10% is what I'm calling participation. It's watching these class videos, answering those class discussion forum questions, things of that nature. 15% are those journals, those informal writing assignments that we're going to be doing about short story, about drama, and about poetry. 25% is that first paper, and the first paper can be rewritten for a higher grade if you so elect. 25% for the second paper, which perhaps you might be able to rewrite it. It's going to depend on the submission date and our negotiations. And finally, 25% the final exam, which is an essay exam that's open book, open notes. And that's 100%. So that you would have an A, excellent, a B, good, a C, satisfactory, a D, poor, F, failing. And I don't like talking about the D and F on the first day of the semester. So we'll focus on ABC. And you can see that also included in the syllabus is criteria for essay evaluation, which talks a little bit about what an A looks like, or a B looks like, or a C looks like, or even a D or an F. And we can revisit that as the semester progresses. I'm very well aware that I've probably just overwhelmed you with information. I don't expect you to remember all of this. I just wanted to give you a holistic view of the semester, noting that we could return back to all of this as these elements become applicable. And now I wanted to move forward to the course outline. And the course outline basically gives you a review of the assignments and the readings over the course of the semester. And there's a disclaimer here. It says dates and assignments may be subject to change, but we should be able to finish everything by the ending of the semester. And assigned readings should be completed before the dates indicated. So what we've got here is on the 26th, the introduction. And that's where today what I'm doing is just reviewing the syllabus and the course outline, giving you a sense of what the semester is. And then we really begin next week. So the next video I'll be posting will be by Tuesday at noon. And that's the 31st. And what my hope is that reading imaginative literature, which for the edition I ordered is on pages 1 through 7, critical strategies for reading, 1641 to 1662, and reading fiction, 13 through 22, is something that you could have read before watching the class video, because you can see that I've said that assigned reading should be completed before the dates indicated. So that would be ideal. I understand that the world isn't always ideal. Again, if you haven't had a chance to read it, you don't need to panic. You can still watch the class video. And note that there is a copy of the text on reserve in the GCC library. But this is where I'm going to talk a little bit about what literature is, different ways we can read literature. And then on the second, you'll see that there are another set of readings. One is entitled Exploration and Formulas, Comparison of Two Stories. So we're going to read two short stories and compare and contrast them. One is considered a piece of literature and one really isn't, and we'll talk about why. One of those short stories is called A Secret Sorrow. The other is called A Sorrowful Woman. And you can see that I've indicated page numbers as well as the surnames of the authors and the date in which they wrote their text, because we will be talking about how important it is to know the time period of a text in order to understand it. Luckily, I have been able to find thus far links for A Secret Sorrow and for A Sorrowful Woman. Hopefully they're still up so that we can reference them. And also there's a section that I wouldn't be able to find online, but it's going to be of importance to us. It's about how do you write about fiction, because eventually we will be writing about short story. In week 3 is really when we begin with short stories, and we will read a short story you may have heard of before by Kate Chopin, The Story of an Hour. It's quite short. It's only about a page long or so, but it has a lot of depth and sophistication, even though it's only a page. And it was written in 1894, so that's going to be important when we review the story to understand or try to understand what the world might have been like in 1894. And I understand that this story was in the earlier set of readings that I had assigned in week 2, but it was only used as an illustration, or it was used only as an illustration by the editors, and I wanted us to read the story and actually analyze it in week 3. And there also is a section entitled Reading and the Writing Process. So you can see that basically the first part of the semester is learning what literature is, how to read it, and how to write about it as we read examples of literature. And then we will read a short story entitled A Rose for Emily by William Faulkner, which you may or may not be familiar with. One of the things that I think that's interesting about this story is that, at least in our textbook, they include an interview with the author about writing his work. So I wanted us to read that. It's very short. It's only about a page long or so, the section of the interview that they incorporate. It's called On a Rose for Emily. And you can see that I've indicated the page numbers where you can find that in the text. And also a very odd assignment. It says Skim Glossary of Literary Terms. By skim, I mean skim. I wanted you to know that in your textbook there is indeed a glossary of literary terms, many of which we will be discussing over the course of the semester. So I just wanted you to be aware that that reference source was there. And then on February 14th, the short stories that I'm hoping to talk about and have us talk about are Young Goodman Brown by Nathaniel Hawthorne. You may or may not have heard of that one. Soldier's Home by Ernest Hemingway. You may or may not have heard of that piece. And lastly, a piece called Battle Royal that appears in a novel, Invisible Man. We don't have time to read Invisible Man. And we'll talk about how Invisible Man is different from the science fiction novel, The Invisible Man. But nevertheless, we'll read the short story Battle Royal and talk a little bit about how to analyze it. And then on the 16th, we should be closing up our short story section by talking about two short stories, one entitled Girl by Jamaica Kincaid and one entitled Popular Mechanics by Raymond Carver. But do note on the 21st of February, I have a catch-up class because I tend to fall behind. And certainly if we have some inclement weather, that can put us behind as well. So at the ending of that unit, the short story unit, is when you are going to have your first journal due on short story. And what I'm going to ask you to do is to choose 3 of the short stories from the short story unit. Now we're reading over 3, obviously, but you get to choose 3. I'm going to ask you to write about a page or so response to each of those 3 stories. You can view them as independent units, though certainly you can talk about them together if you so wanted to. But most students talk about the 3 stories as 3 independent units. So that would mean that your journal, if you devoted a page or so to each short story of thoughts or reflections or questions, your journal would be approximately 3 pages long. And then I would review it, not for grammar or mechanics, but just for content, return that back to you with a checkmark grade. And perhaps there might be something within that journal that can help direct you as to how you could go about pursuing your first paper, which will be due shortly thereafter. And while you're thinking about writing a paper, we're moving forward to our next unit, which happens to be about drama. And we're going to begin the same way. Drama or play acting, what is it? How do you read it? How do you write about it? And the first drama that we are going to be reading is the drama you might have heard of before. And we will read Oedipus the King by Sophocles. This is a very old drama, 430 BC old, from a whole different society. And when we talk about Greek drama, we're reading translation, obviously. You're not expected to read English. And they're always, or you're not expected to read Greek, you're expected to read English. So there are always challenges involved with reading translations that we'll talk about. The thing about dramas or plays is that they weren't just meant to be read. In fact, they were meant to be performed. Reading was secondary. So we will be talking about performance in this part of the semester and actually watching performance. It would be ideal if we could watch live performance. Logistically, that's just not possible, but luckily we have technology so we can watch recorded performances. Now, because dramas are longer, that means we will be spending several class sessions devoted to each drama. What would be ideal is that even though we're spending about a couple of weeks for each drama, when we are first starting that drama, you would have read the drama in its entirety so that we can talk about it as a unit. And while we're talking about it, you can go ahead and read the next drama. Again, I know that life isn't always ideal. That might not be possible. And we will be devoting some time to performance. But I wanted to talk a little bit about Sophocles and why he's considered to be so important, and why Oedipus the King is considered to be so important, and why it usually is examined in literature. So we've got multiple classes devoted to Oedipus the King. We'll spend up until about the 9th or so of March, right before spring break, just discussing Oedipus. So that said, around the 7th of March, if all goes well, is when you would hand in your first paper. Your first paper would be due on short story, where basically I'm going to ask you to select a short story, and I'll give you some sample paper topics, but you can create your own. And I'm thinking that the papers would be somewhere in the area of about 4 to 5 pages, but as we will discuss, as long or as short as they need to be, critical papers so that you don't need to do outside research. And then on March 14th and 16th, we go on a spring break. And then when we return, we move to our second drama, which happens to be Shakespeare. And yes, I teach a Shakespeare class on campus. I am a Shakespearean, but I'm well aware that this is not an introduction to Shakespeare class. It's an introduction to literature class. The play we're going to be reading is A Midsummer Night's Dream, which I suspect you might have heard of before, or perhaps have even read before. We'll talk a little bit about why Shakespeare is so challenging, some techniques for reading Shakespeare, and of course, watching performance of Shakespeare as well. And you can see that we've got about a couple of weeks devoted just to A Midsummer Night's Dream, so that we can watch performance as well as discuss the play. And ideally, those weeks as we are discussing A Midsummer Night's Dream, you are reading our final drama on your own, so that when we get to that point in the semester, you would have read it in its entirety. And as we are reading Midsummer Night's Dream, it turns out that we have a day off on the 30th of March, a professional day, which is for faculty and staff, has nothing to do with students, but there are no classes on that day. So that gives you a little bit of additional time too with the Midsummer. So that was a happy coincidence that that occurred at that point. And then we have our last drama, which is A Raisin in the Sun. As I had indicated, one of my favorite dramas. It is a contemporary drama. So I know that Oedipus the King is from a different culture and a time period. And honestly, so is A Midsummer Night's Dream. We're talking about 1500s England. But once we get to Raisin in the Sun, we're talking about America, and we are talking about the 20th century. This was a play that was written in 1959, but it is incredibly contemporary. It could have been written today in many, many ways. Again, we've got approximately 2 weeks devoted to A Raisin in the Sun, or approximately 4 class sessions, to watch performance and also to talk about the play itself. So by the time you get to Raisin in the Sun, what most students have told me is that this is the easiest of the 3 plays. So this is the reward for working through the Shakespeare, if you want to think of it that way. And then I also have another catch-up class on April 25th in the event that we fall behind. And that's when your second journal would be due. And that's very similar to your first journal, except this time, rather than talking about 3 short stories, you would be writing about 3 dramas. And you don't have choice because we're reading only 3 dramas. So the 3 dramas are Oedipus the King, approximately a page or so in response. A Midsummer Night's Dream, approximately a page or so in response. And A Raisin in the Sun, approximately a page or so in response. So that would be approximately a 3-page journal. But as long or as short as it needs to be, again, of your thoughts and reflections, I read for content, not for grammar or mechanics, and evaluate informally. And get that back to you, and perhaps that'll help you with your second paper, because your second paper will be about drama. No surprise there, since that's what we were talking about. Meanwhile, what we are doing is moving to our 3rd unit in the semester. That happens to be poetry. So we're finishing with poetry. And once again, we have to discuss, much like we discussed with short story and with drama, what is a poem? How do you read it? How do you write about it? Some suggestions for analyzing poetry. And then we get to read some sample poems. Again, we can't read everything that's ever been written, but I selected some poems that illustrate particular styles or techniques. And yes, we will begin with Shakespeare again, because he is as famous for his sonnets, which were poems, as he is for his dramas. So a poem or a sonnet that you might have heard of from Shakespeare, perhaps his most famous, Shall I Compare Thee to a Summer's Day? So we'll read that and analyze it. And then another poem that was also written in the 1600s, though later in the 1600s than when Shakespeare was writing, To His Coy Mistress. People don't know that as well. Written by an author named Andrew Marvell. Very different kind of writing style. Because usually when people talk about the late 1500s and they talk about the early 1600s, they mention Shakespeare and they forget there's anybody else who was there. So I wanted to expose this to someone else. And then one last poem from the 1600s, the author to her book, which I have scheduled for the 4th of May, written by Anne Bradstreet. Now, this is pretty heavy for the 1600s, so I admit, full disclosure, that this is my area of interest, so that's why perhaps we're getting 3 poems from the 1600s and only 1 poem from the 1700s, The Sick Rose by William Blake. You might have heard of William Blake, or you might have heard of the Romantics. So he is an example of the Romantics, which we will talk about, what they were and how they wrote and why they're important. And then a poem from a poem from more like the mid-1800s, actually. So I'm moving into the next century. But I suspect you know the author, Emily Dickinson. So important, if for no other reason, because she's local. And the poem is Because I Could Not Stop for Death. So we'll talk about Miss Emily, as she's fondly referenced, and Amherst when we get to that point. And then I have a poem that's not included in our text. I would have distributed to you as a handout if we were meeting in person. Again, I can find links for all of these poems. It's called American Poetry. The author's name is Simpson. I suspect you probably haven't heard of this poem. It's one of the reasons why I'm assigning it out of the chronology, because it makes some interesting observations about the distinction between British poetry and American poetry that I wanted us to examine as we finish up our poetry section by focusing on Americans, while we began with focusing on Brits. One poem that I suspect you've heard of before that's assigned for the 9th of May, The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost. Next to, of course, God, America I by E.E. Cummings. You might be familiar with E.E. Cummings. The poem America by Allen Ginsberg. And we'll talk a little bit about his kind of writing style known as beat poetry. The 9th of May is when that second paper is due on drama. Again, very close to the ending of the semester. And you can always hand in early assignments. Early papers are encouraged. And then we are finishing our poetry section with some poems entitled The Lover Not Taken by Farley, that was written in 1984. Coca-Cola and Coco Frio, written by Martina Spada in 1993. And a poem I suspect that we are all familiar with, The Hill We Climb by Amanda Gorman, 2021, delivered at the Biden inauguration. And then just one last reading entitled, that's the problem with giving classes at home, is that sometimes you can hear things like telephones, so I apologize. Taking essay examinations to help prepare us for essay exams. So again, my apologies for the telephone. I've got both the landline and a cell, and that's my landline. Okay. And on the 11th of May, which is the very last day of class, this is when our third journal is due, and it's going to be on 3 poems. And you've guessed it, I'm going to ask you to select 3 out of all of the poems that we've read in class and to analyze in approximately a page or so each of those poems, and I'm going to evaluate them informally. And that's it for this semester until the final. What's obviously missing is there isn't a paper on poetry in the final. However, or there isn't a paper on poetry at the ending of the semester because we don't have time. However, we do have a final exam. And for the final exam, the bulk of it is going to be on poetry. 80 points out of 100 points will be on poetry. I'm going to tell you right now what would be on the final. I'm going to select a handful of poems that we read in the poetry section, and I'm going to ask you to select 2 and to analyze those poems. Again, you can utilize everything that we've talked about in class in your journals as well. So that will be on Wednesday, the 17th at 3:30 p.m. because that would be the time in which our face-to-face final would be held if we were meeting Tuesdays, Thursdays at noon. So if 80 points of the final exam is devoted to poetry, we've got 20 points left. 10 points would be devoted to drama. 10 points would be devoted to short story, just to kind of round out the semester. And that basically gives you an idea of what it is we are going to be doing over the course of the semester. Again, I apologize for inundating you with information and for the telephone. But we will talk about all of these pieces as the semester progresses. So what's left is today's attendance question. So if we were meeting in person, we would do introductions. So that's what I'm going to ask you to respond to in today's discussion forum, is for you to briefly introduce yourself to the class. Feel free to upload pictures or audio, but not required. And again, you're not required to respond to your classmates, but you are required to read their responses. So in this way, we can get to know each other a little bit better. And then we can begin in earnest next week, talking a little bit about what literature is and how to read it and how to write about it. And certainly if you've got any questions, this would be the point in the class where I would take questions. Please contact me if you've got any questions about anything that I've covered. So I hope you're doing well. I'm doing well, and we will continue on next week, Tuesday actually, and talk about what is literature. Take care. Bye-bye.